Hi, everyone. I think that's my cue. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm Jacob Moore, the Executive Director of the Architectural League. Before we get going, are the lights okay? Like, you can hear me okay? Okay, great. So before handing it off to tonight's speakers, I just wanted to first begin with a few thanks and then a kind of orientation to the evening. First of all, we have to thank our gracious hosts here at the Cooper Union for tonight and for many other events from this series this season, particularly to Haley Eber, Mauricio Higuera, and Michael Carrasquillo, and then the whole team at the League, who constantly amazes me with their dedication and energy and creativity. Then for tonight's event, a special thanks to Anne Rieselbach, Zoe Fruchter, and Damasi Darby Washington, and we have Sasha Portis on the social medias. This program forms part of our current work series, which is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. Then beyond tonight and beyond current work, absolutely none of this would be possible without the support of Architectural League members, many of whom are here tonight, inspiration, audience, and collaborators for everything that we do. So a few words about tonight's program. This spring, the Architectural League has been working to follow the lead of disability justice organizers as they emphasize intersectional rather than universal approaches to thinking about access. Over the past several months, current work lecture series, we've heard from people working on different typologies, including museums, libraries, housing, schools, and tonight, for the last one of the series, streets. For all of this, our hope has been to support conversations about what it takes to reach beyond the often inconsistently executed design ramifications of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as we address how the fields that are charged with planning, designing, constructing, and managing the built environment can more fully support the creation of an inclusive and accessible world. As we sit here on ancestral Lenni Lenape homelands with violence raging across borders, abroad, and across barricades here in the city, we know that the built environment affects our understanding of the world, our sense of agency within it, and the ways in which society does or doesn't value differing or, perhaps more importantly, dissenting perspectives. In other words, the built environment is a fundamental way that society expresses who belongs, where, and how. Designing for and with difference at all scales and with great sensitivity has never been more important. And there's no place where difference is more apparent than in the public sphere and on the street. So to help us think through that space for design and action, tonight we're really privileged to have three amazing panelists and an equally amazing moderator from WXY Architecture and Urban Design, from the New York City Department of Transportation, and from the Architectural League's very own Urban Omnibus. So I'll briefly introduce them now. WXY Architecture and Urban Design is a multidisciplinary practice centered on innovative approaches to public space, civic buildings, and urban issues. The New York City-based firm's award-winning projects range from buildings such as the Spring Street Garage and Salt Shed to strategic and master plans such as the District 15 Diversity Plan and the Vision for Governor's Island Climate Solutions Center. Adam Lubinsky is a principal at WXY. He's focused on urban design, planning, and mobility, and his projects have included large-scale strategic and master plans with clients and collaborators that range from community development corporations to cultural institutions. He's also an associate professor at Columbia University GSAPP. Claire Weisz is founding partner and principal of WXY Architecture and Urban Design. Her work as an architect and urbanist focuses on public space, structures, and cities. In 2018, Weisz was awarded the Medal of Honor from AIA New York and was honored with the Women in Architecture Award by Architectural Record in 2019. We're also very lucky to have her as a board member at the Architectural League. And though he's not participating in the panel, I should say that WXY's Senior Associate and Director of Planning, Bahij Chansey, has played a really big part in the conversation tonight, and we're really grateful for all his work. Then not from WXY, from the New York City Department of Transportation, Edmund E is an accessibility policy analyst and ADA coordinator for the DOT. A disability rights advocate, he has held positions at Columbia University's School of Public Health, the National Disability Rights Network, and the youth wing of the Ghana Society of the Physically Disabled. Following their presentations, the panelists will come together for a conversation moderated by Mariana Mogalevich. Mariana is the editor-in-chief of Urban Omnibus, the Architectural League's online publication dedicated to observing, understanding, and shaping the city. And as a side note, I just want to plug that we're celebrating Omnibus's 15th anniversary this year, which, and you're all invited to a party, a birthday party, on June 25th uptown. Information on our website, but please reach out. Totally open to all. It should be very fun. But back to Mariana, a writer, educator, curator, and educator. Mariana Moglevich has been researching and producing public projects on the makings and meanings of urban environments for almost 20 years. Among many other venues and accolades, she's author of The Invention of Public Space, Designing for Inclusion in Lindsay's New York, which was published by the University of Minnesota Press in 2020, which received a John Brinkerhoff Jackson Book Prize from the Foundation for Landscape Studies. So we're really grateful to all of them for their important work and for the time they're giving us tonight and expertise. And as a reminder, following the Q&A, we're really excited that we'll head out together to Cooper Square for a workshop with the panelists focused on sensory experiences of the urban landscape. And for those of you signing up for CEUs, League employees and volunteers will have a QR code to scan during or following that on-the-street workshop. So it's part of tonight's event. So you can check in with them on that then. So I think with that, I've covered all the bases, and I'll hand it off to Claire to get us going. Thank you.
Jacob's taller than me, so hopefully this mic's going to work. And let's see if this works. Maybe. All right, arrow, okay. There. First off, thank you to the League, to Mariana, who's going to be moderating, to Edmund, who you'll meet, to my partner Adam, to Bahish. I know we've been introduced, but I think one of the questions always comes up, which is, why is an architecture firm doing this kind of work? And so what I wanted to say is that we have a long history of kind of exploring what architecture and public space have to do with one another. This involves not just us partners, but many, many people. This is currently our office, everyone who kind of contributes the knowledge about public space and brings their own passions to the work. And that ultimately the kind of long-range planning, whether it's, the Navy Yard and wondering if we're ever going to get past those fences and gates, to, what's happening on beaches, to is movable furniture the only way to go in public space, really all things relate to each other. And they really, from an architectural perspective involve, and a planning perspective in terms of those two disciplines, one of the goals we have at WXY is to bring planning excellence to architecture and architectural excellence to planning. So some core questions we have for everyone is to really query what is universal design. And that's a term that we're using now to go beyond the ADA, but to really talk about basically not only accessibility, but inclusion in a broad way, and to start having that discussion. This term may, who knows, we may all decide that it is not effective 2 or 3 years from now, but I think that's what we're using today. For all of us, how can designers center accessibility, and I would say inclusion, into our practice? And how do disabled, whether users of space, people experience the public realm today? And in a project previously, and I don't know if any of you knew Peter Slayton, who's vision impaired, I think in each case, when you have this discussion around any project, we all have new insights. And again, I think that, I discussed this, but right now the paradigm is how accessibility focuses on ensuring that streets and public spaces can be used with people from disability. And then on the other side, how inclusive design focuses and centers affected community and engages diverse populations to co-design equitable solutions. But really in the middle of that is this universal design whose goal is it to create an experience that can be accessed in different ways, but by everyone. And so really that, we want to center the discussion and the workshop today around kind of looking at Astor Place as a case study of these topics. So just to kind of put some facts out there, 1 in 4 New Yorkers or self-describe or have a disability, whatever this is. That the breadth of abilities that designers account for really has expanded beyond ambulatory and sensory, and they include neurodiversity, age, and mental health issues. And from a kind of neurodiversity perspective, there's also a number of, and I see Joel's in the audience, there's a number of other guidelines and that are being developed in terms of looking at, we're all neurodiverse, but starting to look at how that affects our design of the public realm. So in terms of how this breaks down, you guys can see this here, but from a mobility point of view is the barely with cognition, the majority of it, 12%. But all of these kind of types we can discuss within public space, from mobility to hearing, independent living, vision, cognition, and self-care. What are some of the key actions related to this? Number one, to engage affected communities in planning, to integrate accessibility with these initiatives we're all talking about, like resiliency, beauty, aesthetics, viability, how that becomes one discussion, not just like a list of check boxes that you're achieving, and to actually actively, all of us, build inclusive spaces that foster a universal experience. And this really is a huge challenge, okay? There's no getting around it. We all got to this lecture hall today, and I'm sure are all reflecting with this, how we got here and what that meant. So I'm just gonna review where we're gonna go to look at. So from the air, this looks like, sidewalk plaza planted. If you asked anyone out there right now where Cooper Square is, they wouldn't really know. For the purpose of this, we're gonna say it's Cooper Triangle Park and what is known as Village Plaza, but it used to look a lot different. The goal of integrating kind of more nature, green infrastructure, safe crosswalks, lighting, took 15 years to achieve. And obviously, and we'll talk about this, it's not perfect. But you can see the comparison. There used to be a lot more roadbed there. And the reason this project happened, after many years, actually DOT themselves spent about 20 years ago, they had a small pedestrian unit, and they advocated for kind of solving the problem here. And really 2 deaf ears, actually. It took Jeanette Sadiq-Khan coming in and the fact that the 3rd water tunnel could sort of spin off some dollars for this area to make Astor Place's pedestrian-forward approach happen. So I showed you that picture of kind of where we are today. You can see there was Cooper Triangle Park, and there was a very complex, hard to navigate series of barely there crosswalks. So I think the easiest way to understand it is if you look on the right, that is what it used to be. This is in kind of DOT traffic diagram language. And if you look on the left, that was the diagram we fished out of the archives for the proposed changes, again, in Department of Transportation diagram. So everything in green was put back to the pedestrian realm. And so it looks so logical, right? And when you go out there, you can see that the Cooper Square, which is what the road is called left, is almost the same width now as what got added in pedestrian space. So if you look at the Cooper Square on the, what was in 2006, I mean, that's a huge amount of road bed. It's always was a busway, still is. But now, and it went two ways, which maybe explain the confusion. Pete Outolf did the original planting in all of both the bioswales and for all the trees. It was a kind of dream and there was thousands of plants planted. And the first couple of years, the amount of bees and butterflies was incredible. But that requires, as you know from the High Line, and a lot of care and maintenance, which in that regular street sense of New York did not last. So you do have plants out there today. They're not, most of these plants got overtaken by other plants. Same thing with the seating. This kind of shows you that there was originally a plan for benches inside and outside the park, and more, like where you see bioswales and planting, instead of just planter rails, we're going to be rows of benches with backs and with armrests. But anyone here from Community Board 3? No. Well, Community Board 3 didn't want to have seating in this area. So you'll notice when you go out there, the only seating is in the park. Everything else was, whether we did steps or other things, and we said, okay, see this thing around a tree? That's a planter guard, even though you can sit on it. Or here's some steps to allow for performances. But it was really to substitute for the fact that we couldn't put benches. And so you see those rocks with the armrests, the stone with the armrests? Those were kind of put there and as kind of, not interim, but because imagine without anything at all. But originally they were supposed to, on both sides, have way more benches. And so you can see what happened. And this too, this bench, which you'll see out there, is a planter guard, a tree guard. This is a tree guard. And those are also bioswale and tree guards. And you can see there's not really a lot of seating there. But the goal was, in fact, to make space for different streams of traffic, fast and slow. You'll notice that there's kind of strips of granite, and there's other tactile warning that, again, was less about, and I think there's a limitation about visibility, but trying to get the wheeled vehicles and skateboarders to slow down in areas where there are a lot of people. And I think that was my 10 minutes. Okay, great.
Okay, we have to be hydrated for our walk afterwards, which we're super excited to get out to, but really pleased to have a chance to have this conversation first to help set the scene. Before we launch into lots to discuss, I'm going to ask Edmund and Adam to just very briefly introduce yourselves and your work around accessible streets, and then we can launch into a discussion all together. Do you want to start, Edmund? Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So my name is Edmund Asiedu, and you would ask yourself, where is that Asiedu coming from? Asiedu is from the western part of Africa, and the clue to pronouncing my last name is Asiedu. So in case you are trying to recollect who was this guy, Asiedu. Okay, so very briefly, I'm currently the ADA coordinator and also accessibility policy advisor or policy analyst at the New York City Department of Transportation. I would say that very briefly, as an accessibility policy analyst, I get the opportunity to review beautiful designs. A lot of the projects you see out there, get a chance, they all come to my desk. I take a look at them, critique them, not only to the advantage of individuals with disabilities like myself, but also for everyone. As Claire mentioned in her presentation, the same thing applies to New York City DOT. We're trying our best to make sure that everything we put out there can be used by anyone who get to it. That is the goal. And then also, as an ADA coordinator, I think briefly, it's like being an advocate inside New York City DOT for people with disabilities, older adults, parents, and all that. And I enjoyed being an advocate, even outside of work. I try my best to speak on behalf of my people. I'll hand it over to Adam.
Thank you, Edmund. Adam Lubinsky, principal at WXY Studio, and I tend to lead the planning projects at WXY. We're really an integrated firm, and so the planning definitely bleeds into all of the work. When we think about planning, we think about it really through a few lenses, one being qualitative analysis, and that is really about talking to people, engagement, to a lot of quantitative engagement, which is looking at data and maps. And then the third is really policy analysis and seeing how all of that sits within the world and its rules and regulations. And all of that we put to a purpose really to try and achieve good things focused on equity, environmental health. Jacob mentioned some work that we had done, which was the District 15 Diversity Plan, and that was looking at school diversity. We're finishing a 5-year evaluation of that work, and what's interesting is that work already feels like it's missing some things in terms of looking at equity. It was very much focused on race and socioeconomics, but we presented recently, and it was clear that we had not looked particularly deeply at physical disabilities or at special needs students. And so I think the work that we do is constantly, working, but not always getting there, as Claire talked about, even the project that we'll go out and visit, in terms of achieving those elements of equity. And so Edmund and I met as part of a project looking at installing on-street electric vehicle charging infrastructure and nesting this within the world of policy and funding, realizing that all of this federal infrastructure money will come with some responsibility to make on-street parking spaces for EV charging accessible. And so really working through what does it mean to address these areas on street in very challenging New York City conditions to make things accessible for people of all abilities. And I think what we've really embraced is thinking about inclusive design, meaning that everyone's able to share in the same experience in the same kind of way. If you've got a building and you have to go all the way around the back to access it by an elevator or by a ramp, that's not an inclusive experience. So that's something we're interested in talking to you outside as we take a walk around.
Great. I love when everyone jumps in way ahead into so many things that we can get into. I think before starting with the first question, I'm going to move from the kind of general to the particular. I just wanted to ground the conversation maybe in just one observation. We are talking about accessible streets, and thinking about the demands that we put on streets in terms of uses and users and what it means to rebalance those. And I think just, you already brought up Jeanette Sidi Khan, but I think about how we tend to talk about negotiating street use as something conflictual and combative, right? Her book is called Street Fight. There's a brand new New York Times column looking at sort of street issues, and that's street wars. So that's not necessarily, right, pedestrians versus cars, but there's a sort of sense that it's everybody against everybody or everyone for themselves. And the idea, right, that limited space really means that the streets and dealing with them are a zero-sum game. So I'm curious, and I'm hoping in this conversation to hear from you and to see if we can talk through another approach that isn't a sort of win or lose situation, assuming that design especially should provide another way and outside of that zero-sum. So to sort of start from there and sort of getting to that end, I want to ask a question that you've answered a little bit, but maybe we can dive into a bit more about terminology and about how you sort of orient your work at the broadest sense. We've called this session Accessible Streets. We've talked about inclusive design, universal design, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about what it is that helps you and maybe helps us to put everyone a little bit more on a sort of even start to sort of understand what you're working towards. And maybe we can start with hearing a little bit more about what accessibility and inclusivity mean for the Department of Transportation from a city agency perspective, and then go from there.
Yeah, so, sorry. Hello. Okay. Thank you. So I believe that Claire gave very good definitions when it comes to the word accessibility, accessible design, inclusive design, and universal design. DOT, currently, what we are doing is that we are also upholding equity, the word equity, not only abstractly, but also like making sure that we are sort of like injecting or like making sure that every project that, program designers are coming up with, we are considering the needs of, various groups of people, right? And usually you said, individuals with disabilities. I think we come first, mostly. But we also, we think about, seniors, older adults. We even think about, the delivery persons that we see out there as we design, for example, the pedestrian ramps you see at the corners. It serves so many people, groups of people. So in a nutshell, we are taking this approach where, we want to make sure that as we move forward. So for example, those of you who know, New York City Council passed a law, local law 12, I believe, if not 23, that requires all city agencies to come up with some form of accessibility plan, like a 5-year plan, a robust plan. And basically what it means is that if you know of the ADA transition plan, which is required by the federal government, that is like our city version of that. And basically, it requires all city agencies go through all the programs you have and then look at where, there is some sort of like access issue. And it's not only access for people with disabilities, but also access for all, especially disadvantaged, individuals. And we are working on that. And in collaboration with various communities, just to make sure that. So when it comes to inclusive design and accessible design and universal design, if you really push me to the wall, I would say that one leads to the other, right? One leads to the other. So, for example, you want to make things accessible, right? You want to make things accessible. So then the question is, what do you have there as a guide? Oh, you say the ADA. You say the ABA and a whole lot of, even the New York City Code. At the end of the day, you put everything together. You said, oh, ADA says the minimum that you can do, the minimum that you can, provisions that you can make. But then, if you want to achieve, the universal design that we were just introduced to, then you want to go beyond what the ADA is saying, because ADA always talks about minimum, right? Minimum, at least 4 feet, if we say that, like space, so that folks. But if you can leave 8 feet, you should do that today, because, if we look at the presentation, maybe 10 years from now, the square that or the park that we'll all be walking in, in a few minutes, maybe the people there will have more people accessing that. So, in short, just go beyond. I spoke at an equity summit organized by DOT, and I encourage the designers that whenever you are designing something for people, just sit down, spend some time, ask yourself, who am I leaving out, right? Who is, which group of people that I have not considered their needs? And do it with a pen and a paper. You'll be able to remember so many people that, if you had not done that, I don't think you would have been able to. So think beyond the usual group of people that, you always consider when you are designing.
Can I reframe that question for the two of you a little bit, maybe in terms of scale? Because we've already talked a little bit, right, about thinking about inclusion and accessibility at the scale of a plan for an entire school district, or at the building level, thinking perhaps about a comfort station or a set of public bathrooms. So maybe I could ask you specifically at the sort of streetscape public realm scale, how does that differ in approach and goals, perhaps, than at some of these other scales? What is it specifically in the streetscape, in the public realm, that you're working towards and dealing with?
Well, I'll attempt that and get right to the word curbs. So I think a lot of the art of shaping spaces for a kind of universal experience is really understanding that the kind of how we've dealt with drainage and how we've privatized our streets have a lot to do with who gets access to curbs. So one example, which I have no idea if this is good or bad, but when you go to some other cities, the curb cut at the crosswalk is like this big curved swoop. It's not just a cut here and a cut here. It's like the whole corner is mediated. And so in a lot of ways, the curb policy, like EV charging, but also whether something is has just tactile difference, but it's at the same level, where drainage is happening. Like there's that scale of who gets the curb, how public or privatized it is, that is really the bane of these fights. Because I think there's another paradigm back to I don't think it should be a fight. I think if the policy is really universal access, then you want as many people to actually have access. Then that whole argument by one person, one car can be replaced by this many bikes, this many people on buses, that is so clear, and then it's not really a fight. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like the project we did with Justin Davidson like 2 summers ago was called One Street. I still feel like that was a great title, which is, there is one street, but like you have to decide how the most people benefit from that one street.
I mean, I actually think the comparison to school planning is kind of good. In a way, our streets and the way we design them they're pedagogical. And if you are laying down into your surfaces detectable warnings for people who are vision impaired, people read that and they see that and they experience that, and it, I think, really translates in a deeper way to how we want to, how we want our cities to portray themselves and how we want to care for people. So I actually think they are pedagogical instruments. And amidst that, you have a million challenges. It doesn't make that easy to figure out. And when we go out onto the streets, some of those challenges about the intersection with being inclusive in design for people with movement disabilities, to figuring out how to take rainwater and put it into a rain garden. Like, they don't always mesh together so easily, and there's costs implicated in all of that. So that, you know, that intersection of whether it's EV charging or rain gardens comes with a lot of decision making.
So I mean, maybe going from there and getting a little bit more into the particular, when it comes to that decision making, this is, you know, again, for all of you, what are the tools, most important tools, or maybe newest, however you want to take it, that you sort of have at your disposal from a design perspective, from a policy perspective, to really move that agenda forward? What are you coming with to get there, and what sort of does the job most effectively?
Hello. Okay, so you know, when it comes, I mean, the tools are there, right? We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, accessibility guidelines. For example, you can tap on that. You can take a look at that. We have New York City building codes. That tells us a lot about, and sometimes you will see that struggle policy. We had a situation where we installed curbside chargers. You probably heard that during those conversations. You know, that we used, I would say the contractor used ADA, you know, as, you know, sort of like a blueprint. You know, they used everything that it says there. They considered that in designing, and then, you know, putting those chargers on the curb. But then we started hearing from the people. You know, they didn't really come with, you know, as an attack, but they started, you know, saying that, oh, did you put, or did you design these chargers using the New York City building codes or the ADA? They started asking those questions. The answer was, we were very truthful. We considered the ADA. But the difference between the ADA and the New York City building codes is that the New York City building codes sort of like, not necessarily stretches, but it encourages designers to do more. You know, it brings you more closer to the universal design ideas, because, you know, for example, where it says, oh, you should leave, let's say, at least 4 feet, if you really go into the building codes, it will probably give you a higher number, right? So that you will do more, just like that. And so, you know, people were talking about, oh, what is the weight of the, you know, the cable, you know, the charging cable, and all that. But at that time, that is what we could have. And then we decided to expand the program, and that is where, you know, Adam and the team, if you remember, we had a focus group, you know, where we brought, you know, some individuals with disabilities. Some of them happen to be drivers. Some of them use wheelchairs, just to share their experience or how it would be, because I believe, including myself, we all drive gas, you know, sort of like fueled vehicles. But, you know, we brought them together just to discuss, because these same people, they go to the gas stations, you know, they pull up these connectors and all that. What is the weight? How does the weight impact them? And we had a very fruitful conversation, and I'm sure that the designers, they were able to get a lot from that conversation. So it's I would say, you know, for me, stakeholder engagements, I think it's the next thing that is very huge. A quick example, and then Adam will come in, and Claire will come in. We had, you all know we have an e-scooter pilot program in the city. It started in the East Bronx, and then we are expanding it to other boroughs, with the exception of Manhattan. But one thing that we did, we all know that there is nothing like an accessible e-scooter but what we did was that we encouraged the companies to really consider some sort of like 50%, some accessible devices that are out there. We didn't even know something existed. But they started getting into, wheelchair attachments. I didn't know there was something like that. It was really cool. The day I tried it, I was like, I want to get one of these. Literally, I plug it into the front of my wheels, and then I hold on to it, boom, I'm gone. It's very cool. So we encourage the 3 vendors that we're working with to have these devices, as part of, the fleet that they will be providing. Most of them, they are for free. If you don't know, I'm telling you today, if you have an individual with disability at home, if you be visited by somebody who has a disability, these companies, you can just pre-order. They will bring it to your home, help you as to how you can put it together. But let me say this very quickly. We didn't end there, right? We said, hey, you know what? Now we have technology. We have internet. We have AI. We have so many things that are going on. We can do more for the community that has been neglected for so long. So then we brought the designers of these 3 companies and the disability community together. So the designers asked them. So we run a competition, basically, that will help the companies design something that is not already in existence, and also something that will serve more than beyond people with mobility disabilities, right? Like somebody who is blind, somebody who is an older adult, a device that you can just walk into it. Just use your voice to speak. Just speak to it. Tell the device your destination, and our hope is that it will take you to wherever you want to go. Something that is tele-operated, and they work on it. Some of the companies came up with cool ideas. I cannot say much about it due to proprietary concerns, but cool designs that I really want to have them tomorrow. Like not for myself, but have them on the street. I wish we could have them. So public engagement, when you bring, like there is a saying that people with disabilities, we are experts of the things that we need. Talk to us, and then we will be able to talk to seniors, talk to parents who push strollers as we're designing, and you'll be able to come up with one solution that will serve all of us. I don't know whether I responded to your question, but I think I was all over. Adam?
Well, I think you said, Mariana asked about tools, and you said the best tool is public engagement, which I'm all for and would support that too. I mean, there are amazing things happening now in terms of technological tools, whether it's scooters or EV charging. There are a couple of platforms that allow people who have visual impairments to hold up a phone, and they can get a volunteer from anywhere in the world who can essentially tell them what they're seeing in front of them, and so there are remarkable things happening, and that's really coupled with a world that we're in where we're trying to do so much, as Claire was saying, with the curb now, and so everything we're doing, whether it's about drainage or it's about restaurants or it's about scooters or it's about waste, comes with a negotiation. And so the best tools are going to be the ones that allow us to negotiate those things. I mean, our office has been working on the prototypes for new curbside restaurants, and I'm sure many of you have experienced where you'll have the sidewalk and a curb, and then you'll have a bike lane, and then you'll have some restaurants. Really, really complex. And so this idea of creating inclusive design for someone to go from that sidewalk to a restaurant with the expectation that you go down, from the curb, cross a active bike path, and then up onto, a platform of a restaurant, that requires a lot of negotiation. So I would just agree with Edmund. Best tools are going to be tools for engagement, which are focus groups, surveys. They can be online. There are many, many ways to activate those tools.
Great. Do we have time for one more? Or okay. Well, I think maybe this can be a good segue, and you can take it a lot of different ways. But I think one of the things that's so clear from everything that you've said, and also from the presentation, is what a moment of change and adjustment and development and learning it really is around these questions. So maybe it's a segue to getting outside in this kind of moving target space. How are you sort of assessing your work as you go and learning? And we talked a little bit about this, but kind of accounting for a certain amount of uncertainty and change over time in such a contested space.
I thought for sure you would talk about the parking tool that you will in a second, but I think that, I talked a little bit about how Astor Place was a 15 to 20-year project. What's exciting about thinking about public engagement as a tool and technology is that it just puts so much more power in the hands of individuals, because you can see streets, you do this beautiful pavement, and you think about the kind of experience, and about like 6 months later, it all gets ripped up because there's so many actors who are trying to get below the surface on the street. There's huge number of rules because we haven't necessarily, we're starting to change, but we haven't really changed the equipment, whether it's ambulances, fire access. So many of the things that we want to do relate to the old sizes of things. Big equipment, because we were a car-driven culture. Actually, in a city that used to have, the original cars were tiny, and they all moved a lot slower. So there was a lot more coexistence and intersectionality in the city before it became 100% car-driven. So we're in a moment, I think, that the size of things counts, like trying to actually get our civic infrastructure to be small and actually really quick. And I think the slowness of response time, we're all trying to go, well, if we can talk to someone across the world, or if someone who's blind can get someone across the world to tell them what's going on, how do we really put up with the fact that we're going to close a street for 3 years and people won't be able to cross it? So I think we're at a really interesting moment where, like, okay, what's happening? I think it's worth you just even talking about this tool that came out of the EV charging experience.
Sure, I'll talk about the tool. So tools can also be technological. When we were doing work for the DOT to locate EV charging stations, we were trying to come up with a model for locating them based on where fire hydrants were, where tree pits were, so people didn't get tangled around them, and they were more accessible. We also did something that the Department of Transportation's never done, which is catalog all of the signage regulations. So we have made it open to the world. It has a lot of potential applications. I mean, in the most basic sense, if you're going somewhere, you can see how much parking is available to you versus how much loading space, versus the time of day that you may go and may want to find parking. But I think, just to take that further, being able to kind of plan your journey, understand spaces, there are many ways of doing that through technology, whether it's a Be Your Eyes platform or it's technology that really helps you trace that path.
Yeah, I would say, how many of us know Navilance? Navilance, Navilens, Navilance. It's a technology that I think it's my favorite when it comes to wayfinding for individuals with vision disabilities. It's MTA piloted it at the J Street station recently. It got really good feedback, like good reviews. So something like that. I mean, the world is changing, right? But I just wanted to add one example to what you just said. You know, like I mentioned earlier, DOT right now, we believe that when you include the people, you are able to do the job right. And so we all know of Open Streets, right? The Open Street program. It's really popular. Like, I am for it. I am for it, and I even hope one day in front of my building we will have an open street. I just hope one day. Now, there is one in Queens, Jackson Heights. If you live in Queens, 34th Avenue, that is the populous of all the open street. Now, and this is going to be sort of like a little, sort of like opposition to the work that we do. So we have this open street that people, different groups of people, including people with disabilities. I have people with disabilities who live, within these corridors, have reached out to me saying, Edmund, thank you to DOT for just, telling drivers that, you know what, you can only come into park and then leave. You cannot even drive more than 5 miles per hour when you are in here. Then we also have some actors, right, of the process who have come together to say that, you know what, DOT, you are, devaluing my property in this building. Because of Open Street, it seems my condo will not get the price that it deserves. It deserves in maybe 10 years from today. And do you know what they are really fighting for? They are fighting for parking spots. Somebody said that. But they have never mentioned that. And guess what? They realize that the Americans with Disabilities Act is really strong. So then they decided to go around it. So in my inbox, I have an email that is publicly available on DOT website. And then we have a paratransit program in this city that provides door-to-door services. But if you don't live in a house, you live within a long block, what Access a Ride does is that you are usually dropped off at a corner so that you could use the pedestrian ramp, to get on the sidewalk. Now, the people who don't want this open street, what they do is that when they see that somebody is being dropped off at the corner, they will sit in their bedrooms and take photos and then send them to me. Edmund, look at what is happening. This person was not sent, or this person is not being dropped off in front of their homes. Can you imagine that? With no evidence. But the reason why they are doing that is that they know that Americans with Disabilities Act. So when you continue reading the email, at the tail end of it, I'm going to sue DOT. And then in my head, I'll be like, you just say you're going to sue New York City. You're not going to sue DOT. You're not going to sue me. It's a city thing. But at the end of the day, long story short, at the end of the day, I have been to this particular location many times. I cannot even count. Winter, early in the morning, rainy days, just to observe how people are using this cool program. And you'll be surprised. Parent having kids, stroller, running with them, so many things. And the coolest part of it all is that all the schools within these corridors, we are redesigning the front space of it. sort of like giving the schools extra play areas for the kids to have fun. Who doesn't like that? You know, and so what I usually tell them is that, you know what, because of what we are doing, your properties will probably get you more money in the near future, because in New York City, our backyards, those of us who live in inner city, our backyards are the streets. That's it. When you step outside, you step onto the street. So if somebody is coming and you have all this space, they would rather be happy. They will be able to run in the morning, in the evening, and all that. So I just wanted to add that you know, sometimes our work, you will have people who will, you know, they will just hold up. This is actually what I'm telling you right now. We are really close to being sued. You know, very close to being sued. But thinking of, we've done so many things to make it inclusive. You know, parking and all that. I was telling Adam, you know, we have neighborhood loading zones. We have intentionally, you know, placed them at the various corners as you move along, so that people with disabilities who drive can park their car there without any form of issues and all that. So it's usually like that. But guess what? We enjoy working with the people, and we are still working with them. Because, like Adam said, that is how we'll be able to come up with solutions that will fit everyone, including, in this case, homeowners, or, you know, people who own condos in these buildings. So,
Great.
thank you.
I'm glad that you ended with the solution to this, because I was worried you were going to take us right back to the start of the conflict, and the fight is happening and we're getting sued, but also there is a resolution that gets everybody more or less what they want. So I think without further ado, we should make our way upstairs and outside and onto the street so that we can continue and dig in to the streetscape itself. There's lots more to talk about. So we're going to head outside and back up the stairs and outside. There are bathrooms and water fountains if you need to refill before we head out on the on the right. And you can follow staff from the Architectural League wearing lanyards to help direct you where we're heading upstairs.